The subjects of measurement and description come up in psychology and science, and I think warrant a little bit of a discussion. Measurement, simply put, is using a rule to assign a number to an observation. For example, if we were to talk about the length of something, you could specify a rule, you could state a rule. Something like take a ruler and place it next to the object so that one end of the object is aligned with the end of the ruler, then read the number off of the line that most closely comes to the other end of the object. If we were talking about weight, you might say something like place the item on the scale and read the numbers and record the numbers that come up in the display. So this probably appears pretty straightforward, but when we get into psychological processes, behavioral issues, and so on, we start to maybe wonder about what we're measuring. So when we talk about intelligence, sometimes we're just talking about the answers of certain questions on a test. When we start to talk about depressions, we might talk about particular answers on a test as well, or descriptions of feelings and those sorts of things. So how is it that we measure intelligence? How is it that we measure depression is an important, I think, concept in psychology. One way of dealing with this historically was to use operational definitions, which were defined originally in physics and then applied widely to psychology. And basically what they do is specify what is being measured and how to measure it. So we might operationally define aggression in a context, in a psychological context. Let's say striking, hitting, kicking, punching another, or any attempts to do so. That might be an operational definition of aggression. In psychology, operational definitions are used widely. Now, operational definitions in science per se are of unquestioned value and practical significance. What they allowed scientists to do was to conduct experiments on common phenomena. If they agreed on what something was, they could operationally define it, and then if you were halfway around the world, you could do an experiment on that phenomena as well, because you had the operational definition of that feature. Now, their use in psychology is contentious. Now, again, their value is unquestioned, but in some cases, it's been pretty troubling. Now, why? Why are operational definitions troubling? Well, number one is that they may just be labels for something, and we study this and we call it in psychology the nominal fallacy, and that is just because you labeled something, just because you named something, and that's where nominal comes from, is that it's the process of naming something. Doesn't mean that, one, you have any idea what it is. You can name it, but it doesn't mean that you know what it is. And worse, doesn't mean you understand it. Just because you named it doesn't mean you understand it. The second problem with operational definitions is that it may reflect just truth by agreement. That is, if you and I agree that aggression is hitting, kicking, and striking, that doesn't mean that everybody agrees that that's what it is, and that doesn't mean that it's true, which leads us to the third part, and that is that usually operational definitions are incomplete. We've all know really intelligent people that don't do well on tests. And we all know people that do really well on tests that aren't really that intelligent. Furthermore, there are types of intelligence, let's say, argumentatively, that there's people that work well with others but aren't necessarily book smart, or they can sense emotional features of situations but can't use a calculator very well. So there are many properties of intelligence that it's hard to believe that we're going to be able to completely study and take into account all these possible features. And in our example of aggression, what if you're tripping somebody? We didn't include that. And you might say, well, all we need to do is add more parts of the definition. And before long, though, what we find is that the definition is onerous. It's too big to deal with what we're talking about. So I prompted you to think a little bit about the definition of an operational definition of depression, and according to the DSM, the Diagnostics and Statistical Manual of the APA, it's a mood disorder that involves sadness and anxiety and sleeplessness and so on. And as we look at these terms, though, what we see is well, we need to talk about what a mood disorder is. What is a mood disorder? How do we operationally define mood disorder? How do we operationally define sadness? How do we operationally define anxiety? Sleeplessness seems to be pretty clear. Loss of interest seems to be pretty clear, but each of these other ones is made up of another operational definition, another way of measure. So when we're talking about many of the psychiatric and psychological disorders, they wind up referring to behaviors like loss of interest, not being able to sleep, not wanting to go into public places, not wanting to get out of bed, those sorts of things. So operational definitions of psychological and psychiatric disorders often come down to identifications of what people do and don't do. And that has interesting implications, I think, for treatment. Hopefully that helped with some measurement stuff.